Good evening, Erev Tov, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming on this on these increasingly cold Jerusalem evenings when everyone's been. I know there's the temptation after you've lit the Hanukkah candles, it's just like okay, zell, like now we're going to just have a cozy evening at home. So I appreciate that you've come out. I should say that the timing of this event and this film was not related to Hanukkah, but there is in searching for a connection, I actually found one quite quickly, which was that the one of the many themes, of course, of Hanukkah is the struggle against a particular kind of oppression, which sought to quash Jewish identity, right? To quash Jewish observance, to desecrate the temple, to do away with the things that made Judaism unique, the things that made being Jewish different, the things that made Jewish identity different. And I think in a lot of ways, in our times or in more recent times, one of the most significant and unfortunately successful versions of that same tendency was communist Eastern Europe, and the all too successful quashing of Jewish identity to the point where people didn't know, grew up not knowing they were Jews, or discovered later that they had Jewish parents or grandparents. And that's very much the story of large parts of Eastern Europe, including Poland, that we'll be focusing on today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly introduce the film. We're going to watch the film. It's about 40 minutes long. And then I'll invite our two very special guests for a conversation with me and then with you if you have questions for them. We are honored to host this event in collaboration with the European Association of Polin, the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. The film is called Proof of Identity, and it's by Mikolaj Greenberg. I might be butchering his name. I apologize to him if I am. The Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews celebrates 10 years through which it's established itself as significant in preserving and presenting Jewish heritage through its core exhibition, A 1,000-Year History of Polish Jews. It tells the remarkable story of Jewish life in Poland across 10 centuries. Many of you will know, of course, that before the Shoah, Poland was home to the largest Jewish community in Europe, the largest Jewish community in the world after the United States, and subsequently suffered the largest number of casualties, of course, of victims. The European Association of Polin Museum works across Europe to support Polin and its mission. And Mikolaj Greenberg, the director, is a writer, a journalist, and photographer. And the film offers an intimate exploration of contemporary Polish Jewish identity, delving into the unique experience of being Jewish in modern Poland. But it also tells a wider story of Jewish identity, the story of each one of us, especially after October 7th. And in our discussion, we're going to be exploring those themes of Jewish identity in the diaspora, in Israel, and also how and if that has changed for us since October 7th. I should also say that the publicity that you will have seen told you that the discussion is going to be chaired by Anna Zielinska. Unfortunately, due to a family bereavement, she was not able to come. She was supposed to fly over here, and unfortunately, she wasn't able to come. She's now, I think, in Poland. So I will be doing my best to chair the discussion myself. Okay, without further ado, I think we will get on with the movie, and then we'll see you in about 40 minutes. I'm going to introduce our guest speakers. With that, Ronnie. Yasmine Kainy is an 11-time nominee of the Israeli Academy Awards and a winner of the 2022 Best Documentary Series Award for her groundbreaking series, Mental State. She's directed over 20 documentary series, films, and investigative documentaries. Her debut film, Magnificent Failure, which tells the story of Harold Rubin, an artist and musician tried for blasphemy in South Africa, opened the Tel Aviv Centennial celebration. In early 2023, she released her documentary feature, Where Are You Going?, which chronicles the exceptional life story of writer and Holocaust survivor Helena Birnbaum. The film's been screened in Israel, Poland, and the United States. Following the October 7th massacre, Kainy has been involved in several projects documenting the impact of the Hamas attack on Israelis. Her documentary, Beyond October 7th, tells the story of the Gad family from Kibbutz Be'eri. It premiered at the Israeli Doc Aviv Film Festival and has been screened in France and England, with a US premiere scheduled at the Miami Jewish Film Festival. And in addition to her filmmaking, she's a lecturer at Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, and the international program at Reichman University. Yasmine Kainy. And we're also delighted to be joined by Noah Efron, the founding chair of the program in Science, Technology, and Society at Bar-Ilan University, also a member of the City Council of Tel Aviv Jaffa, and a chair of the Municipal Committee on Religious Pluralism and Committee on Environment and Sustainability. Noah has a very, very long list of committees that he's members of, so if you'll forgive me, I won't list all of them. I will say that he served on the Board of Directors and Scientific Committee of the Land of Israel Museum in Tel Aviv. He was also a member of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, a fellow at Harvard, Columbia, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT. He's the author of A Chosen Calling, Jews in Science in the 20th Century and Real Jews, Secular versus Ultra-Orthodox, and the Struggle for Jewish Identity in Israel. Some of you may know him as the host of the Promise podcast on TLV1. Sort of light show going on here. That's good. So, the Promise podcast on TLV1, which, in the words of the podcast at least, is considered the greatest contribution to Jewish culture since the time of Maimonides. So we can decide that for ourselves, but Noah Efron, I'm very, very grateful that you're with us. If you could join us as well, we'll start the conversation. Yeah. Okay. We're going to broaden the conversation out to discussions of Jewish identity writ large and looking specifically at Israel. But I do want to stick with Poland to start with. And Yasmine, I know I mentioned in the bio, so you had this wonderful documentary, Where Are You Going?, which was set mainly in Poland. And I think that was the first time you'd visited Poland. Is that right?
Well, the amazing thing is that Yaakov Gilad, who is responsible for Efil Ve'avak, which is sort of the music, the first time that texts that dealt with second-generation Holocaust survivors were put into rock music.
With Yehuda Polika.
I'm sorry?
With Yehuda Polika.
Yeah, with Yehuda Polika, exactly. So he wrote the songs or the poems, and Yehuda, the music to them, and he did that without ever setting foot in Poland. So when I found that out, I was like, okay, well, the first time he goes with his mother, I'm definitely going. And the amazing thing is that we found my grandmother, Paulina Lev, was also born in Warsaw. And she lived in the same street as Helena Birnbaum, which we found out. Wow. And I never set foot before I made this film because I was scared. And when I did set foot there, I could understand why Helena, for example, who is a superstar in Poland and is not as well known here in Israel. If you watch the film, you'll know why. There's a secret there.
There's the little teaser.
A little tease, yeah. So she really is Polish and Jewish and Israeli. And when I was walking the streets of Warsaw, and actually Yaakov Gilad says that as well, as he was walking down there, something there felt familiar. Was it the Polish that I heard from my grandmother? I don't know. But there was something that echoed familiarity to me. So I think that identity never completely goes away.
Yeah, because I think a lot of Israelis have this Polish connection because so many Jews can trace back to Poland, including Menachem Begin, of course, which is why our center has a very strong connection with Poland.
But isn't it amazing that in Israel today, when you say Hi Polania, she's a Polish mother, it's always derogatory.
Right.
It's always derogatory. It's unbelievable.
Right.
And Yid, or a Jew in Poland, that's always derogatory. So you're like, what am I to do?
Which speaks to some of the things that we heard, which is this idea of not being at home anywhere. But we'll talk about that. No, I know that you also have a strong personal. You had some very powerful personal experiences in Poland, I think.
I did. I mean, I also have family that goes back to Poland, but my powerful experience was began at a conference of history of science, and a number of the historians and I decided to take the day off from the conference and go to Auschwitz, which we did. I was the only Jew there. The historians of science were interested in it for other reasons, but it was a very powerful experience. And I was still shaken by the experience, as one will be, when I got on the plane the next day to fly back to Tel Aviv, and was seated next to Shevach Weiss, who had been Speaker of the Knesset, a very fascinating, very wonderful man who, as a child, lived through the Holocaust in a wall, in a peasant home, and has written and wrote beautifully about his experience. And we were on an airplane seated next to each other, and on the other side of him was a youngish woman in her early 30s, and Shevach Weiss, being affable, leaned over and asked who I was, what was I doing. I told him about Auschwitz. I told him how awkward it had been to be in Poland, because I was one of I think, many Jews who were raised with the aphorism that I think is problematic, but with the aphorism that the Poles were worse than the Germans. Always raised with to believe that, and it had, the first time I went to Poland, my grandmother was horrified and terrified that I would be willing to go to that place at all, that terrible, terrible, terrible place. And I recounted some of this to Shevach Weiss in the trip to Auschwitz, and he said, what you need to understand is that Poland is a beautiful place, which shocked me, knowing only his history in the Holocaust. He was, in fact, I think, coming from an opening of this museum, or a meeting before the Poland Museum was open, and he then introduced me to his girlfriend, who was seated next to him, who was a young Polish scholar, not Jewish, and he said, if you want to believe that human beings can change, you should go to Poland and speak to young people like my partner here or others, because what it means to be a Jew in Poland, for Jews and non-Jews alike, has changed so dramatically over the course of my lifetime. It has made me feel young again and hopeful again about humanity, to see the change in Poland. And we talked over the course of the flight, and I was left with this very confusing end to a very confusing visit to the place.
Yasmine, you grew up in Israel, right? When you hear diaspora Jews like the people in this, I mean, Poland obviously and Eastern Europe generally is different from other places, and we'll get into that. But when you hear them say things like, they feel, I mean, there were different answers to that question, how Polish do you feel, right? So there was the guy with the long beard who said, when he was asked if he was Polish, he said, I'm a Polish citizen, which I thought was a very interesting answer, because he was differentiating between, I mean, he's technically Polish, but he feels Jewish. And there were other people who had very different answers. And as an Israeli, sort of born in Israel, you sort of avoided all that messy.
Not exactly. I was born in the States.
Oh, sorry, you're born in the States and you grew up.
I was born in the States. So my family is really an example of the wandering Jew, because every generation was born in a different place.
Mm.
My daughter was born here in Israel, but she's the first one.
Huh.
So my parents were born in Eastern Europe during the war. They were born in the middle of the war. My father was born in Siberia in a work camp, and my mother was born in hiding. So I don't completely know the story because they don't always tell. And so they came to Israel in 1950 and went to America for school. And so I was born in the roaring 60s in San Francisco and came here as just a baby, but still something, because I have an American, because I'm an American citizen and I can really understand that, I actually went back after the Army and lived for 6 years in San Francisco and went to school in San Francisco, which is kind of where my English is from. Because I spoke English at home, but anyways, that's complicated. So I feel that the first time I met American Jews, some of them were my family and I've known them for many years, but I thought it was just my family having this split identity, or what I thought as a youngster was a split identity. And when I lived in the States and got to know American Jews better, I just think, like one of them said, it's two halves of a whole. It's like you can't say that you're Polish or you're Jewish. You can't say you're American or you're Jewish. You're both. It's a hyphenated identity, but it's a name of an identity. In a way, I feel closer to that now because after living in the States for so long, since I came back, there are certain things that I still miss, and I go back and forth quite a lot. Also, because I have family in Paris and in London, so I know French Jews and I know British Jews, and each diaspora has sort of a different kind of slant to it, but you can feel the Jewishness is always there. It just has maybe a different accent to it, I guess.
Yeah, I always think that American Jews, the difference with American Jews really versus any other diaspora community, I think, is because of the unparalleled success of American Jews in integrating and becoming part of and which is a lot to do with America itself and also the size of the American Jewish community. But that hyphenated identity, I think, works or has worked. There's obviously debate as to whether it's now coming a little bit undone. That's another story which we can get to, but that it's worked in America in a way that it hasn't necessarily worked in other places. And I mean, just speaking personally for a second, I always felt that I was very much growing up in the UK, that I was a Jew living in Britain, whereas my American friends and family were American Jews in a way that I didn't quite feel that same thing. And I want to know, you obviously born in the United States, grew up in the United States. You were, I think, a young man when you moved here. What's your take on that separateness of American Jews that makes it somehow different to other diaspora communities?
It is unique in that the hyphenate nature of it, or the synthetic nature of it, I think is more profound than in most, or maybe even all other places. The fact that that hyphen is not necessarily a sign of tension. It's not necessarily problematic, that it is very possible for that to be your identity. I am an American Jew, and those two words can roll off your lips as though they fit together absolutely naturally, that they're at the same time. That wasn't my experience. I mean, I think that I became a Zionist young. I became a Zionist when I was, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 years old, and never stopped being a Zionist, and had already resolved before my bar mitzvah that I was going to live in Israel, in part because I had what the historian Peter Gay calls hunger, called wholeness hunger, a wish to not be wrapped around a hyphen, a wish to be one thing and not two things. Americans of all sorts of identities these days talk about something called code switching, where in certain contexts you're one thing and in other contexts you're immediately something else, and you become very well schooled at switching, at switching the language you speak, at switching the conceptual world, at switching your implicit map of what is acceptable to say and believe and to talk about and what is unacceptable. And so that you, on the outsider, when I went to university, then I was a certain sort of person, which is to say, I went to a Quaker college, and I understood the language of universalist pacifism. I understood the language of universalist cosmopolitanism, and I lived in that world and excelled in that world. But then when I would go for drinks with my Jewish friends, I was a very, very different person, which I felt some simpatico with some of the folks in this movie. I've now, after this showing, seen this movie 3 times, and I find it very moving and very sad and very beautiful. Each of the characters having this meeting of their Jewishness, sometimes their unwanted Jewishness, and their Polishness, clearly their unchosen Polishness, be a point of such vexation, and them, I think, most of them being quite well convinced that that there's no solution to this problem, that they are uncomfortably these two different things, which makes them also neither thing fully and authentically, and you can just feel the pain. And I think lived in the place where it is, or certainly it was, most plausible to feel as though that meeting of these two identities is no problem at all. And yet, even way back then, I experienced it as a problem. And now, like you intimated, after October 7th, I think that many people feel as though it's a huge problem and shocking to them.
But before we go to October 7th, if it's okay, it's true that because I grew up here, I went to the army here, I think I wasn't even aware of, as my stepfather said, Harold Rubin said, all the baggage of being a Jew. When I interviewed him, he said, I was born in South Africa, a Jew with all the baggage of being a Jew. And I was in the beginning of my 30s. I didn't understand what he was talking about, because when you grow up in Israel, it's like water for a fish. You don't see it. You don't have to remember that it's Rosh Hashanah or it's Hanukkah or anything like that. And it sounds something small, but it's actually really deep and profound. And I remember my first Hanukkah Christmas, I'd say, in the States, and this is 89, and I'm like, I don't know, 21, something like that. And I was shocked at how foreign it all seemed. I thought it was going to be like in the American, Hollywood movies, and it was not. I felt far away from home, and it was strange. And that was kind of when I looked for the Hillel chapter closest to me, and basically discovered I was Jewish.
I had an experience when before I made Aliyah, I was living in London. I was working at the Israeli embassy in London, and so I had a lot of Israeli friends, most of whom were not religious. And the religious ones, the Israeli Datiyim, it was a bit different, because they were they'd found a synagogue that they went to, and they were sort of part of a Jewish community in some way. But the secular Israelis, which was the majority, were not part of any Jewish community in London, and just enjoyed living in London. And then one of them, this girl, had a very strong connection with the Shoah. I think her grandparents were survivors, and she found it very, very hard that on Yom HaShoah, there was nothing. And I actually found for her a tekes, a ceremony somewhere that she could go to, because she wasn't part of any Jewish community, so she didn't know. And the fact that everyone else around her here in London was just going about their business was completely, and there was no siren, of course, was just fundamentally shocking for her. And I think that's the as you say, the whole Jewish experience, the holistic Jewish experience in Israel. Before we get to October 7th, I wanted to ask you both, that woman with the glasses said, I thought it was quite an amusing comment. She said that these American Jews come and they always have an opinion. And she said that both the American Jews and the Israelis say, I think she said, they think it's absurd that we're still here. So I wanted to ask you both, I'll go to Noah first. Do you think it's absurd that they're still there?
That there are Jews in Poland?
That they're staying there?
No, I don't. And maybe I should thank Shevach Weiss for this, but beyond that, the history of Polish Jewry is a miracle. It's astonishing. It's beautiful. And so were someone to feel as though I believe that this is a place where I can be Jewish in some important way because I just feel 800 years of history emanating from the stones in the street, I would understand that. Or someone feeling as though for all that I was not given what some people are given, an actual homeland where I do feel whole, where the language that I speak and the thoughts that I think are similar to those of all the people around me, or similar to what I learned in school, and that my heart beats along with everyone else around, even though they understand that maybe they don't have that option. I think for someone to grow up and say, I am a Pole, the poetry that moves me is Polish poetry. The weather that moves me is Polish weather. I understand that entirely.
What about you? Do you think it's absurd?
I think for many years, I was sort of under my grandma's spell, who on the one hand described Warsaw as the most beautiful city in the world, and said, you know, you think Tel Aviv is a city that's not even half of Warsaw on the one hand. On the other hand, she wouldn't go there, and, you know, really persuaded me not to go because she didn't want me to see all the horrors. That's on one hand. On the other hand, I got to, when she was already really old, I got to take her to the Tel Aviv Museum to see Yael Baltana's Polish series. It's a series of video arts. If you haven't seen them, I don't know where they're going to be shown, but one of them has a young Polish poet standing in the middle of a stadium that hasn't been touched since World War II, and he's calling for all the Jews to come back in Polish. Wow. He says, please come back. And when my grandma saw this, she was a very strong woman. She said, I have to sit down. And that was I mean, she wouldn't cry, but that's like the closest she got to sobbing. And she said to me, you know, it's not just the Jews that suffered from this. It's like, she says, in her words, she said, the Poles and the Jews were like Siamese twins. And this destroyed the Polish culture just as it did the Jewish culture. And this is how, and obviously it's not the same, but there were 6 million exterminated, but she felt just like Halina, I know, Birnbaum, very close to Polish culture. And so for her to hear or to think that they would want the Jews back, that was something that was sort of, I don't know, a remedy for some kind of remedy. Maybe.
Yeah. It's one of those ironies that Europe sort of, in its various ways, sort of tried to do away with its Jews at one point. But Jews were some of the major cultural contributors to European life for so many centuries. Let's go to October 7th. because firstly, it's of course this ever-present issue on all of our minds, but also because I think that there's a question to be asked of Israeli Jews as to what October 7th did to our sense of Jewish identity. And I know, I'll just stay with you, Yasmine, you did this documentary film and about Kibbutz Be'eri. And I know you said to me when we first spoke, or one of our earlier conversations, that you had a very different response, that the film got a very different response in Israel than outside Israel. Can you speak to that a little?
Well, first I want to say that I kind of relive that day on a weekly basis. I was involved in actually 3 projects. I was part of the team of Israeli filmmakers. About 30 of us who volunteered to film the families of those kidnapped before we even called them Mishpachot HaChatufim, before we knew what it was. So I live with these images and these stories. I went to Kibbutz Be'eri. The first time I filmed there was less than a week, like October 12th was the first time I was there. So I can still smell it, and I was holding a camera, and a camera helps, but you're not immune to things. So I guess it was the first time for me to feel threatened. Even though I lived here like everybody else through all the wars and sirens and this, but you get used to it. And, you know, heck, we're Israelis, we're tough. But this was different. And I think it made me look differently at things. Mostly to say, I said that in the screening in Tel Aviv. You know, I stand with the people of the South. I stand with the people of all those kibbutzim and all those places that were hurt in such a terrible way. And I cannot not do that, which doesn't mean that I don't oppose war and whatever, but I stand with them, and I think it was the first time for me to, again, sort of break this glass of something being taken for granted. Now, Israelis watch this film, and they identify, obviously, with this family who survived miraculously and what happened to the community. But they don't see it themselves as being threatened, because the threat is already away. Okay, because they saw this. I followed this family for 8 months. So by the time it was shown, the threat is already away. But when, for example, I showed the film to Israelis in Paris, and then I showed the film to the Jewish community in Strasbourg. Completely different. So the Jews in Strasbourg were, by the way, under attack pretty much, because this film was supposed to be shown there as part of Shalom Israel Film Festival, and the city hall said to them, it's too much of a threat, we can't
guarantee your security.
We can't vouch for your security, so cancel everything. But they've already bought me a ticket, so I was there already. So I showed the film, and you can see that they watch this and they feel threatened. So that sort of arises, that sort of brings up, I don't know, fears, big fears from the war, or, you know, big fears that they live with all the time. The other thing was that they said, what can we do? What can we do to help here? I mean, Israelis are very much into, I'd say, themselves, their own pain and how horrible, and my family this and my family that, and sort of finding family connections. And Jews of the diaspora are like, what can we do? How can we help? And I think that was heartwarming for me and quite surprising.
Noah, what's your take on this question of October 7th and what it's done to Israelis in terms of their Jewish identity?
Well, there's the question of what it has done to Israelis, and also a question of what it has done to Jews around the world. And and partly, Yasmine, what you said is important and right. I think there are other things as well. One of the things that it did for Israelis, I feel, I mean, obviously it did a multitude of things. One of the things that it did was it gave us, I think, more intensively than any of us have ever felt in our lives, that feeling of all hearts beating as one, that feeling as though after this year when we felt more divided than we've ever felt, and suddenly you feel as though, oh, I am part of a people in the sense of a Volk. I'm part of I'm part of a people who have a deep emotional tie that is so strong that we didn't even know that it was there, and here we see it, and it is pushing us to go and make meals and serve them to the people staying in the hotel across the street. And it's pushing us to go dig graves in the first 2 weeks after October 7th, and it's pushing us to do all of the things that all of us did. It's pushing 150,000 people to show up at the expo in Tel Aviv, to volunteer, to do something. So that was a remarkable feeling, and it felt as though, for some people, felt as though they were reminded of what they had felt in the past. But for many people, I think it was the first time that we felt with that intensity that we were part of a Volk, part of a people. At the same time, I think that it made us feel as though we were separate in ways that we had not known from the rest of the world. Yeah. I remember that letter that I don't know, 450 leftists wrote to the left just a week and a half after October 7th, expressing their disappointment that the worldwide left had come out so vociferously against Israel so immediately.
This is from the Israeli left to the world.
The Israeli left to the world. And on that list, I was not one of those people, but I think that I knew 75 people on that list, and they were heartbroken people who felt as though their being an Israeli and their viewing themselves as a citizen of the world was unproblematic, and suddenly seeing not only that it was problematic, but it was untenable. All of that is going on in Israel. For me, the most heartbreaking thing that happened after October 7th, aside from the immediate heartbreak of the horrible deaths all around, was the position of many Jews in America. And I also registered the people that you were talking about, Yasmine, but around our family Seder table in the United States, there were young people who could not acknowledge that I and their cousins had come from Israel, because they were no longer willing to say those syllables, Israel. And here we are at Seder together. And I think that for many American Jews, and I'm sure not just American Jews, that October 7th turned them into the people we just saw in this film about Poland. It turned that hyphenate identity into something that was exceedingly problematic, where they could not go back to university. My son is at university in California, but on October 7th, he phoned me up, got the credit card, came to join his, he had just finished the army, so he joined his Miluim unit, spent 6 months fighting in Gaza, and then went back to college, where his friends in college took him out to coffee and said, hey man, we don't know exactly how to negotiate this. We're not quite sure that you're not a war criminal. And so his Jewish friends. So I think that after October 7th, there are hundreds of thousands or millions of Jews who face that visceral dilemma that the people we saw in the film face of, I don't know what my identity is. I don't know what it means to be a Jew. I don't know what it means to be an American. I can no longer code switch successfully. I no longer know what I can speak to, what I can speak about to whom, when. And I register that there is just this really enormous heartbreak mixed with fear, mixed with uncertainty about their identity among American Jews, including I just today got an email from someone I'm in touch with who said, I realized I just can no longer be a Jew. A very active Jew, a head of a Jewish organization who wrote and said, I realized that I can no longer call myself a Jew. I do not have the heart to call myself a Jew at a time when what being a Jew means is killing Palestinian babies. I am no longer a Jew, which is an astonishing thing that I never thought I would see.
I wonder if Americans who are not Jewish, just Americans, if they would think to divorce themselves from their identity if their government does something that they don't agree with. I mean, the American government has killed so many people around the world. It's astonishing. But I think they're all in this negotiation. I mean, what we saw in this film, which is really an amazing film, is sort of this inner negotiation of who am I?
Right.
Am I more a Jew? Am I more a Pole? And it's the same with American Jews now. I have family in New York and in Washington, D.C., and we had a Zoom call also with the Australian part, and they were like, what are you guys doing? Meaning in Gaza. We're like, well, at this, and I was right back from filming in Beirut, so I mean, it was still smoking there. It was still smelling like death there. This is way before.
We hadn't even started a military operation.
Right. Way before. And I said to them, I just want to stay alive if you don't mind. Right. That's all I'm talking about at the moment. We can talk about it later on, whatever happens. Yeah. But the thing is that it's just things move so quickly. And this feeling, this amazing feeling that you're talking about, this unity. I was cutting, I don't know, cucumbers as well, but it faded so quickly into this balagan that we have at the moment. So
yeah. Okay. I think we have a short amount of time for questions. So I'm going to ask if one of my colleagues at the top, Slicha, Chevre, if one of my colleagues at the top can come and bring a mic and we can go to questions. Do we have questions? Yes, we do. Very good. Okay. So, okay. To that. Okay, just wait for the mic because this is being recorded. So I want the people watching on YouTube to be able to hear the question as well. Okay, so you can ask our guests anything about the response to the film or anything based on what they've said so far. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you for this possibility. My name is Alexei Krzyzewski. I'm a translator. I translate.
Can you speak up a little or hold it closer to you?
My name is Alexei Krzyzewski. I'm a translator. I translate Polish plays to Russian and other languages. And I translated a thing which is called The Suitcase by Małgorzata Sikorska-Miszczuk. And the main character is seeking his identity by following every religion in the world. And he finds his identity, Jewish, of course, observing the suitcase of his father in Krakow, in Auschwitz. I found it, do you find it, I found it strange but good that people in the film don't use the Shoah as the main part of the Jewish identification. they don't speak about Shoah. They speak about what's contemporary. Do you find it strange? Do you find it good, or do you find it bad? Do the film miss Shoah, or it's good that
they didn't mention the Shoah, that the Shoah didn't come up?
I really appreciate that question. It's wonderful. I find it good that in that place that's not the central touchstone of their identity and their identity seeking. I have to say that one of the mysteries to me of this movie, of this group of people, is what really they're referring to when they talk about their Judaism, because through the movie, there's no reference to any content at all, not historical content, which could be the Shoah, or it could be the 750 years prior to the Shoah. It's not, save for the two religious characters, it's not religion, and they don't speak very much about religion either. And so it's unclear that this identity feels to me, in the movie, feels to me a little bit like a phantom, like something that, you know, it's a title, it's a word that they know has grave power, that it affects the way that people around them see themselves. It affects the way that their parents saw themselves and saw their kids. But I don't know, I don't have any idea what it means to them. And you obviously know these people much more.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know them, no. What I was thinking was that actually the filmmaker was very smart not to put it sort of in your face, because it's there by the fact that they cannot escape their identity. So whoever your friend was who said he cannot be a Jew anymore, well, he can try not to be a Jew until his neighbors will tell his son that he's a Jew, because this is something that's special, I think, about this kind of identity. And I don't know if there are, you know, I'm not a researcher, so I don't know if there are other identities like that, ethnic identities around the world, where you, even if you don't want to be, you're not religious, you don't know anything about your history, but there will be someone in your environment who will say, ah, you're a Jew. So there it is. You have to deal with it. All the baggage of being a Jew.
I think in this case, they feel as though their identity, the one fellow who says, I know my Polish identity is, you know, is driving fast in my car and whatever. I don't know what my Jewish identity is. They clearly feel as though their Jewishness is the part of them that is foreign in Poland, but I don't know what content it has.
Well, that was interesting. Sorry, just say it was interesting that the religious woman, I'm assuming she was religious with a headscarf, she was the one who said very, very quickly and with a sense of pride, I've always been Jewish. I've always been, I'm Jewish. I'm proud to be a Jew. And I think that she's the one, I mean, you know, people, some religious, not religious, but clearly she does have some content. It doesn't have to be religious content. In her case, it is. But the religion provides a content which I think is missing for many.
She's also the only one who said, I am a Polish patriot.
Polish patriot, yes. But it was this interesting kind of patriotism. It was patriotism that was informed in some way by the Jewish connection to Poland. And then there was that interesting aside of how the Poles give her the middle finger when, yeah. Okay, yes, gentleman in the beard and glasses.
Thank you very much. I found that the child was the most remarkable because the child actually was the movie. The child was trying to figure out who she was. She said, I don't know. And I think every one of them really doesn't know. And it's only when we receive a sense of who we are in the essence that we then pick up who we are. And we have to have an encyclopedia of references to who we are, a dictionary of terms, a gallery of portraits, scenes in that movie within ourselves, and the background music to life, from lullabies to anything else that accompanies it. But many of these people didn't have it. And that's why the child was so absolutely wonderful, because in every one of them, there was a question of, what is your fear, your anxiety, your sadness, depression, despair, anger, frustration, irritation, resentment, envy, pride, and celebration? And they didn't really have those answers. And that's why the child who didn't answer, answered the very essence of the movie.
Do you want to? Would you like to comment? I mean, it wasn't a question, but it was a very profound comment. So thank you very much.
I agree with you. It was beautiful. The child was beautiful.
One thought I had about that is that it seems like, I think in a certain way, they all had a certain childlike quality to their engagement with this issue. But she's the only one who had an excuse because she was the child. She was the only one who was actually a child. But yeah, it's very interesting. Yes, with the glass, yeah.
I'm coming for you.
Okay, we'll wait for the. Yes, I'm giving my colleague here a bit of a workout.
Hi.
Very good.
I'm Yehuda Eliezri. I found it in discussing the very person who was unique there, she was talking about a mission. She was talking about there's a minyan. If there's a minyan here, I know we can create a community here. I know that we can create something. It has nothing to do with being Polish. It has something to do with creating a life for Jews in which some healthy, positive activity can take place. And as soon as that happens, is gone, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Whereas the others who, I remember that one woman who cried. It was touching to me that she was trying to struggle, trying to consider something positive about being there, something positive she didn't want to lose. What was that which she didn't want to lose? And she couldn't express it very well. But I can think of other analogies to victimized minorities, like in America and others. There's a tremendous investment in remembering how bad they were to you. There's a tremendous investment in remembering that despite all the terrible things they did to us, we survived. We somehow survived. I don't want to let that go. If I get away from here and I go to Israel or I go somewhere where I'm no longer a victim, then what's left of me? I'm a walking victim. My identity is a victim. Somebody has attached the identity of Jew to me. I never adopted Judaism. I never adopted my Jewish identity. Somebody told me, oh, you know what? You were born of a great-grandmother who was Jewish. So I'm stuck. And if I'm stuck in any way that is positive, it's because I am part of other people who are stuck. And we're all stuck here together. And there's an investment. There are people in America who are victims, and it's important to be the victim and remember that you're the victim and play on that victimhood. And I think she couldn't let go of that. And I think there's it's a malady that perhaps is defined by living 800 years, not of the most illustrious life, but of repeated slight hope and then being crushed time and again, time and again, with all the culture.
Okay, thank you. Any comment on that question of whether you think that some of them, or that woman or others, had a sort of victim mentality, which they don't want to let go of somehow?
I just think that in Israel, there are enough groups who feel victimized. So maybe this feeling of being a victim is not necessarily if you're in the diaspora, but yeah, I guess you could find it there as well, for sure.
And just as a footnote, not important in the scheme of the more important thing that you said, I would not characterize the 800 years of Polish Jewish history in that lachrymose way. It was not a series of pogroms. It was the creation of really one of the most astonishing Jewish cultures in all of world history.
Okay. Okay, well, we can continue the discussion later, but let's go to another question. Yes, sir.
Hello. I just wanted to correct one thing. Żyd in Polish, it's a neutral word. It's not negative or positive.
Sorry, can you say that? I didn't quite catch it.
Żyd in Polish is not a negative or positive word, it's neutral. Żyd in Russian is negative, opposing to Еврей. I wanted to ask you about something that I experienced. I used to be a madrich, the Taglit from Poland. And in the end of it was 15 years ago. And in the end of the trip, everyone was so excited and full of like Israeli pride. We were feeling like at home. And I was asking the Hanikim how they feel like being here in Israel, their home. And they were excited. Some of them, they were crying. Some of them, they were actually deciding to go on Masa or make an Aliyah. But one girl said, nice trip. It was very pleasant, but that's it. And I asked her, like, so is she planning to do something more after she come back? No. Why would she? One of her grandparents was Jewish. Other one was Italian. Other one was German. Other one was Russian. Why would she put her Jewish roots in front of the others? How would it be fair for her to build her identity on that? So she is, because she's alive, a member of the third generation of the Holocaust, who is like, who treats the Shoah not as a fundament, as a founding stone of their identity. Now we are now even in the fourth generation. But if you count the generations, we are farther and farther away from our Jewish ancestors. So what would you tell, would you answer this girl? Why would she choose the Jewish identity? Why would it be special for her?
I'd say let her be. I mean, seriously, if you don't feel the connection, you don't feel the connection. It's not something, I think it's kind of like love, like falling in love, or like belief, right? You can be very observant, but if you have belief in you, you have belief. If you fall in love, you fall in love. If you feel connected to a land or a language or a certain culture, then you do. And if you don't, then you just don't. I mean, to me, it was a big surprise to walk the streets of Warsaw, being there first time, what was I, 55? No, 53, whatever, you know, and it was shocking to feel the connection. I came to the street, Franciskanskaya Street, number 12, I think, and I saw that it's a new building. And I was like, you know, in Israel, they do something called pinui binui. They tear down the house. And I wrote to my mother, I said, well, they did pinui binui. You can't find the house. But to me, it was amazing. I was standing there and I felt it in my body. You can't fake that. It's either you feel it or you don't. And just like I did, somebody else could come down that street and not feel it. And I think in that sense, that's why I feel very much connected to art, because I think art a lot of times is stronger in that sense. Maybe she's not connected now. Maybe she will be connected in 10 years. Maybe she never will.
Did you want to?
No, that was a beautiful answer.
I mean, I will say, I mean, all the people in this film, even though they were coming from very different places, had different things to say, different answers to that question of how they deal with the Polish-Jewish sort of dichotomy. They all, I think none of them are like the person you're talking about, because I think all of them had, I mean, I think almost by definition, they wouldn't have been, I think this, I think was it a girl you said? This girl in your group, this Taglit group, would not have been in this film, because I think the people who appeared in this film were by definition people that had something to say. Even there was a woman who said, the very first thing she said was, I don't call myself a Jew, I say I have Jewish heritage, and you sort of think, oh, so she's gonna be the one that doesn't really have that much connection. But then she's the one who goes on to say that she took a pebble from Har Herzl to bring back, to put on her great-grandmother's grave, which I thought was fascinating. Like she really, like that I think is incredibly powerful, that sense of connection or the need to imbue her great-grandmother with the Jewishness that she wasn't able to have in her life. I think that was, for me, a very powerful thing. Okay, final question from Carolyn here. Oh. Really? Okay. I apologize. You look very different in the film. Ah, well, okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. Let's have a round of applause. We actually have one of the stars of the movie with us. Okay, final question.
Thank you. I'm sorry. There you go.
It's incredible, the film and the discussion. One thing that really hit me the most was the person, I can't even remember who it was now, that said it's like living on ice. You never know when it's going to break. And unfortunately, I think for many of us, I mean, I would say that it's the first time in my life that I can see that Jewish people around the world, I've been talking to people from Australia, Britain, France, you know, it doesn't matter who you speak to, certain parts of the States, that we really do feel that you really know, I was speaking to a couple visiting from Melbourne. We were volunteering together, and she, you know, Melbourne's known to have had a really strong Jewish community. And she was saying, you know, she's on the ground floor and she doesn't feel comfortable having her mezuzah showing. I mean, it's still showing, but she was saying, you just never know when someone's going to say something in a supermarket, just an offhand comment. They may not even know that she's Jewish. Right. So this for me was really powerful hearing that, because it's a bit how I feel. You know, I've always been Jewish, not always religious, but I can honestly say that now I'm here, this really is my home. I don't feel like at some stages in my life, I would also say, oh, I have to think, am I British, am I Jewish, you know? And a lot of my life traveling around the world, I felt like a citizen of the world. But now I'm here, I can honestly say, I feel Jewish more than anything else. And so, you know, it's a double-edged sword, like the lady said, you know, that because of the war, it's united everyone in a sense, in that we really all feel so protective, you know, especially when we see the media that's so biased against Israel. But that thing about being on ice that can break at any time is unfortunately all too true these days. So I'd be interested in what they have to say about that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Some final remarks, especially in response to Carolyn's question.
Well, that's a very sad and important thing that you just said. And I mean, there's I think comfort for us in Israel feeling as though I for all that October 7th was this terrible, threatening shock that left us feeling unsafe and insecure in ways that we hadn't felt here for a generation at the least. I think that we get to feel as though we're not really on the ice, that the people in Melbourne, where their synagogues are being firebombed, you know, still feel. So that's true. The only thing that I would say for all that what you described is true and important and tragic and heartbreaking. One thing that I learned from the movie, I think, is that, and it feels like an old Jewish lesson, an old Jewish diaspora lesson, but there's something about this struggle that I find beautiful and meaningful. There's something about, I'm still enough of a I guess a Galut Jew, I guess a cosmopolitan, I guess to feel as though when I saw these people, you know, struggling with this question of who am I and what is my relationship to the air that I breathe and the people I went to school with? What is the relationship between, what relationship do I bear to the food that I eat? I find those questions very moving and very powerful. And one way to live a life, the way that I strove to hope to give to my kids, is feeling like whole and certain and confident, that's what Israel offers, and it is beautiful. And in the end, I would prefer it. But there's something about living a life in which you're always drawn to question, what does it mean to be a Jew? What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be so tied to this place and yet feel alienated from this place? There's something powerful and beautiful about that too. So I'm not so quick to just, for all that it's terrible for any Jew to be living on ice that might crack at any moment and then fall through. I wish that on none of us, but there's something about that state that I think is powerful and leads to a kind of spirituality that you don't get elsewhere as well.
Thank you, Noah. Last words, Yasmine.
Yeah, so I was for many, many years, just like the filmmaker who was saying, I never thought of moving to Israel because I don't want to live around so many Jews. It's too much for me. So I guess I kind of felt that way, especially after living in the States, and I like the politeness and not people asking me, so when are you having kids? You know, are you married yet? Leave me alone. But I think it has to do with where you live in Israel, maybe also. And I just want to share, if that's okay, my personal experience in that I lived in a boring place called Givatayim for many, many years. It's a good place to raise kids. And then they're all grown. That's great. And now I moved 4 years ago. I moved to Jaffa, and I live in a mixed community. I live across from a church. There's a synagogue down the street, and of course there are mosques around. I have a neighbor who is Jewish, religious, and I have a neighbor who's Amina, who's Muslim. We have kids who are the same age, so we have a lot of things in common. And people often ask me, after October 7th, how's Jaffa? How's Jaffa? Because Jaffa, I guess 4 years ago in the last round was skittish, was, fires tense. In the middle of the tents, fires in the middle of the street, and it was tense. But Jaffa after October 7th is a tight community, is a mixed, tight community. And you can talk to people, the guy I buy my fish from, the guy I buy my hummus from, and these guys, they all of a sudden understood that they feel no connection to Hamas. They want to live under Israeli law as long as they get equal rights. And they send their kids to Israeli schools because they are better. So that all of a sudden, after October 7th, because everything was quiet in Jaffa, I felt at home for the first time. Wow. So I'm a Jew living in Israel, but it's not just Jews around me. It's mixed, so I feel at home.
Very nice. Okay, thank you very much to Noah, to Yasmine. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our special guest for his contribution to the movie. Anyone who isn't on my mailing list and would like to be in here about the events that we do here for English speakers, drop me an email, paulg@begincenter.org.il. But that's center spelled the incorrect American way, CENTER. And Chanukah Sameach to everyone. Bye.